as an art director, you also have to step back a bit and thinking like, it's for the greater good. Like you shouldn't just be too focused on your own style or what you want to do, but let everyone in the team kind of join in and kind of bring their flair into the project.
Hey Hatchlings, welcome to the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Akins. Hey, and welcome to episode 48 of the Motion Hatch podcast. Thank you so much for being here. On this week's episode, we spoke to Nydia Diaz. Now, she is a 3D art director. So today we talked all about art direction and what it takes to get hired as an art director. It was a really great conversation, so I know you're going to enjoy it. But just before we jump into the episode, have you heard our last episode with Evan Abrams, episode 47? It's all about pre-production and why it's important to us and our clients. So if you haven't checked it out, go and check it out right after this episode. Evan also made a great video series on pre-production with a great tool called Millernote. Now, Millernote is a tool for organizing your motion graphics projects, everything from the creative brief, mood boards and storyboards. You can have all your pre-production material in one place. I've been using it to organise my projects since Evan told me about it, and I'm really happy to say that they're partnered with us to bring you this episode. So if you'd like to check out Evan's series on pre-production or Millernote, just head over to motionhatch.com/Millernote. Now let's get into the episode. Hey Nidia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
And thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My name is Nidia. Obviously, that part was easy to know. I'm from Portugal. I was born here, but I've moved after my university. I moved to Sweden to study at Hyper Island, motion graphics. And then from there, I went to UK, to London, for my internship. And then I just ended up staying there for like 7 years. I mean, not at the internship, but in different studios. Last year, I was in Toronto for a year, working full time, and I'm freelancing remotely from Portugal.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So you studied at Hyper Island and then you kind of moved around a bit. You worked at a lot of good studios like Future Deluxe and Man vs. Machine and Territory and stuff like that. What was it like working for those studios and how did you contact them?
So with Future Deluxe was actually full time. I was there for 2 years as a full timer. That one, I think I just emailed them saying that I really liked your work. At the time when I saw their stuff, they were still kind of growing. It wasn't as known as nowadays. So I just emailed them saying, hey, I found your stuff and I think it's really cool. And then we just started talking. And then I just went there for an interview. It was really like laid back. It wasn't that I was looking for a job or they're looking for someone, but it kind of just was a correct, like the perfect timing when I emailed them, I guess. So I was there for 2 years and I had a great time. Then Man vs. Machine was actually my, when I went freelance, when I was still in London, was actually the first studio I went. Did a project for them, which is really nice, and they're all very nice and very creative. And then Territory was also freelance. So that one was, they contacted me beforehand, before even I was a freelance, asking if I was available. And I said, not now, but I'm actually soon going freelance. So after Man vs. Machine, I went straight there for a month or so. So it was also nice. And it was interesting because I was working a bit with movies at the beginning of Territory, like UI and all the stuff, which I haven't done before. So it was interesting to see all the different process between each studio and how each creative director and everything kind of works out and everything. So it was great to I like going around just because it's so fun to see how each company has their own like teams management and all like how they organize everything and all of that. So it was really cool.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. So I just wanted to ask you a bit about what it's like to be an art director for motion design projects and how you kind of got started in that role.
Yeah, I think it kind of grew organically into that. Like when I started after I left Hyper, I was just like a motion designer for 3 years. So I was just doing a bit of everything, comping, style frames, 3D, After Effects, whatever we needed to do for the project I was doing. But then at Mainframe, I started doing more and more style frames, which I actually wasn't aware much that we had to do that. So I really enjoyed that. So I slowly started thinking, oh, I really want to do just style frames. So I started thinking of how could I approach that. So after Mainframe, where I was for 3 years, I actually decided to quit that job and try finding a job in graphic design, just because I have that background. I studied in Portugal graphic design, and I felt like I wanted to polish my typography skills and all that kind of stuff with grids and all of that. So I searched for a job in London that was graphic design, and I stayed there for a bit less than a year, just to get those things. And then that's when I applied to Future Deluxe. And when I got to Future Deluxe, I was a senior designer rather than just a motion designer. So it's like slowly building up to that. And after my time at Future Deluxe Analog Studio in London, they're looking for an art director. And one of the partners had actually worked with me when I was at Mainframe. So he kept on following my work. And he said, hey, we're looking for an art director and you've been doing great work. Do you want to come for a talk? So that's kind of where I swapped between going from just a designer to going to an art director. It's just that I got a job offer for that. And then it was kind of scary, to be honest, like going from like senior designer to just, oh, I'm now an art director. I don't know what to do. But it was still like, it kind of gave me a bit of confidence that someone else was looking at my work and saying, hey, we're looking for an art director. Do you want to be an art director? I was like, yeah, sure. So that's kind of how we started, I think. It was just like slowly me trying to be better and understanding better the process of different parts of the process of creating a piece. Like I always felt that I needed to understand each part to actually be a good art director, not just the style frames. So I try really hard to like understand each part of what the team does. And as well, Analog was more VFX based rather than motion graphics. So that for me was also interesting because I wanted to see how a small VFX studio would work as well in the industry. So I tried to just pretty much get all the knowledge I could.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you kind of started off doing the animation, doing the motion design side of it, and then kind of got more skills as a designer and then sort of combined them both, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people still ask me if I do animation nowadays, and I can still do it, but because I've been focused mainly on style frames and art direction, I say I can, but I'm not as good as anymore because I just don't practice anymore. So it's quite funny that's how I started, but I just don't do it anymore.
Yeah, but I think it's like you say that it's good to have that background because then when you're sort of doing style frames and stuff, you have a better understanding of how it's going to be executed as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was something that I really wanted to. Obviously, depends on the studios, but sometimes I know that I need to simplify the designs based on budget, time wise, or the team. Or sometimes I know that we're going to have like an incredible team, so I don't have to worry too much about being like simplifying things. It's interesting to like understand the budget and how much specialized people or not we're going to have, and that influences what my designs are.
That makes sense. So is part of your job kind of managing some of the team as well, or not really?
Yes, it actually is like that was the thing that I really thought about it at the beginning when I was like, oh, I want to be an art director. How can I get there? It was that you stop being so hands-on and you just start managing a lot of the team and the project. That happened last year when I was at Tendril in Toronto. We were working on this Microsoft project that I was art directing. And I spent most time, besides the beginning, which was still like very loose explorations as we're going back and forth with the client to understand the style. As soon as the project really kickstarted, I spend more time giving feedback and making sure everyone was doing what they should in the style than actually doing style frames. So it's always like, now that I'm freelance, I'm trying to balance a bit between art directing and just designing because I really like designing. And as an art director, you can obviously say, oh, let's do more like this. But then at the end, is someone else doing the style frames, not me. So it's always a bit like, I want to do style frames, but you have to like make sure that everyone actually goes through the project and everything looks great.
Yeah. So is part of the job kind of communicating the style frames and stuff to the client directly as well?
Yeah, part of it was like creating the treatment, making sure that the client and we are on the same page and that we kind of understand how it's going to look like. Obviously things change as it goes. But yeah, I think like I always like having this kind of good back and forth with the clients, not just waiting for like a few weeks and then sending things and then they don't like it and then you have to go back. I think it's important to kind of keep a bit of a loose conversation. Obviously, you don't want to be always sending too much stuff to the client. It's kind of managing both things, right? The feedback from the client when he sends stuff, but as well trying to like filter it down so you don't send like a bunch of like a massive list to the team and you're just like, okay, you do this and then I'll be the one getting the hits from the client and and trying to like sort things out and all of that.
Do you think that if someone listening and they're like, oh, I'm not, at the moment I'm a motion designer, I want to be an art director. Do you feel like there's like one path to do that? Or what would your tips and recommendations be to maneuver yourself more in that direction?
Like I said, for me, it kind of grew organically, but it was part of me as well. I knew I wanted to do it. So I was really trying to like explore first, obviously the style that I do is more 3D, but it's like trying to understand the process and what each person on the team does. So I'm more aware of how I can talk with them and as well explain a project. One of the things that helped as well is like, which I said that at a talk recently, and it's funny, but one of the things that helps a lot is actually owning it, like saying that you are an art director. Because a lot of times, like, people go to your website, right? And if you just say designer, that's what they're going to think you are. You just put it as a designer. So it also helped me. Like, it took me a while to actually like owning it. But once I put I'm an art director on my website, I actually start getting more requests for art direction, which is funny because it's not just about the work. It's like really owning it and saying I'm an art director. But I feel it's just trying to really understand the process, because that will help you as you go through the projects. Like, you should be able to communicate well with the team, what you're thinking, and as well like with the client, so everyone is kind of like in the same page.
That makes sense. I think that's like one of the skills that people find the hardest, like all the communication with the client and with other people. And like, especially like some people, I think when they think about art directors, they probably don't think about the managing the team side of it and that kind of communication. They just think, oh yeah, just making like pretty style frames and you have more control over the creative and things like that. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, it's for me, it's like I always have to like some projects you already have a team and you have to like sometimes like, oh, I need to get them stuff to do, and as well like managing like different teams and sometimes freelance remote, and you have to like be sure that everyone is not still waiting for you to give feedback. So yeah, there's a lot of management involved, and a lot of times you have to be like, oh, I have to create a mood board, just give it to them, and have to write a little idea so they understand what it is. It's more about that. I obviously have to have the idea and how you're gonna look, but it's more about the team that you're working with. And as well for me is trying to bring the strength of each artist into the project rather than just, I never want to tell someone I want exactly this. Each artist, if they're part of the team, is because they're there for a reason and you got them because they're special at something. So I always like to just give them like an idea and there's like a mood board or something like that. And then to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of, but explore. And so many times they're like with the Microsoft project, there was so much stuff that the freelancers would send or like someone in the team. I was like, oh, that is great. I haven't actually thought about that. So let's actually continue with that path. So I think it's as well like as an art director, you also have to step back a bit and thinking like it's for the greater good. Like you shouldn't just be too focused on your own style or what you want to do, but like let everyone in the team kind of join in and kind of bring their flair into the project.
In terms of like the difference between an art director and a designer, then is it like the art director, you're kind of doing more of the style direction and stuff, like you're saying this is the style we're going to go with and stuff like that, but you're maybe not necessarily designing the whole piece. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like some project I was able to as well design some parts. Some projects is like I don't even have time to design. Like I've done one freelance project a few months back and I barely touch any like design parts. I may have done some like fixers or changes in someone's thing, but it was mainly like, okay, can you do this part and you do this one? And it's just like managing everything. So we have everything in time and everything kind of going the same way. So yeah, it's a lot of management as an art director.
It just makes me think about some companies, they wouldn't really think about hiring an art director, maybe. Like sometimes it seems like the role might be missed out from like smaller studios and stuff like that. Have you kind of seen that is the case or not?
It's a bit hard because like even when I was thinking of being an art director, I feel it's like in our industry, it's really, the roles are so like mixed sometimes that it's really hard to like, is this actually what an art director does? And there's also like design director. Are they the same thing? I don't know. I always feel like very confused. And sometimes I think, especially in small studios, I think you end up doing more than probably your role as well. Like you end up doing more. For example, I was doing, when I was a Microsoft thing, I was also like trying to plan the live action, like making sure that everything was not just like how it should look and all the stuff, the set design, but also like the story, how we should like film it and all the stuff. So I think then sometimes there's blurred lines between, maybe there's someone who's a designer at the studio, maybe they're actually doing an art direction role because probably they're managing some projects. So I feel it's very blurred lines between things. So I don't really know. And most of the studios I've been, like at Featurelux, there wasn't an art director at the time when I was there, but there was a creative director, which was one of the partners. And I mean, he did an amazing job. And I think a lot that I know nowadays, and I do try to do it as an art director, I learn from him just by seeing him like work with us as a team. But again, he was a creative director, but he was still doing the art direction as well. So I think it's very blurred. Depends on the size of the company and all that stuff. It's really hard, I think.
Yeah, like it's hard to know sometimes. I think like what is the art director doing? What's the creative director doing? What's the motion designer doing? You know what I mean? It's like you say, it's probably different on every project. Probably depends on like the scale. Like I imagine it's a bit like sometimes the creative director is more the client facing person, talking to the client, trying to get the brief into something more manageable for the art director than the art director's doing, like leading the style and like helping manage a team. And it must be quite difficult to know like where you fit in that kind of thing sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like a creative director is much more like managing different projects at the same time, like making sure that like we're getting, like you said, with the clients and getting projects in and stuff like that. And I feel the art director is much more on one project. So you have that project and you kind of manage that team and make sure everything. I think the creative director is much more like overseeing a lot of projects and kind of choosing the art director or the director for each one and kind of always having a bit of an eye through all the projects before you send it to the client, make sure everything goes according to plan and what the clients ask and all that stuff. So I feel like creative director is more overall a lot of projects, and the art director is more like onto one project, making sure that from the beginning to the end it kind of goes as it should.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's very clear. So when you were kind of reaching out to people earlier, you said that you just emailed people. I just wanted you to explain a bit about like how that conversation went. Was it more like, oh, hey, I'm an art director, this is what I do? Or because I think people struggle with cold emailing and stuff like that. So I just wondered how you tackled that outreach.
I feel it's fine, like with emails. Like I think we're always like, when I was starting out as well, and I was even applying for internships, I was like so scared and like, gosh, what should I write and all this stuff. But then I realized that, you know, every studio is going to always get emails for freelance or full-time positions. And I think it's more about just being like, email the companies that you really like, but be like personal as well. I think it's more cold email is when you just kind of copy and paste. Mm-hmm. But if you do something like more personal and if you really enjoy that company, like what you like about it and why are you contacting them? And I feel it's always like keeping it short as well. Like you don't want to make like a very long email because like a lot of times studios don't have time to go through those things. So it's like, are you a freelancer looking for us to put you on our database? Do you want a full-time position? It's like, it's or an internship. It's like, I think it should be clear right away, like what you want from that email as well. So it's not just like a big email and then at the end it's like, oh, actually you're looking for a freelance. You know, it's like, it should be more, okay, I'm a freelancer. Like when I went freelance the first time, about a month or 2 months beforehand, I was like emailing some studios that I like saying, hey, really like your work. I've been following for a few years, really like this piece. And I'm just, in a month or so, I'm going to be come freelance for the first time. And I just wanted to let you guys know in case you may need any help, you know. So it's like, it feels a bit cold, like, hey, here's some emails. But at the same time, if you don't email the companies, they're never going to know that you're freelance. So it's kind of a bad loop as well. So yeah, I think it's just, for me, I feel it's more just being like personal. Don't do the copy paste because you're going to see it. I think it's like if someone says like, I really like your work or love this piece that you've done or something like that, I think it's always good. But also as well, like when I was at Tendril, we had like a little chat with a guy from Hyper actually that they contact Tendril, and he's just asking like normal questions. And so it was me and talent manager, and he was asking kind of that similar question, like how do I email or how do you find things? And the talent manager actually said that he's like, if she gets an email, usually she's the one going through a lot of the emails. So for her, it's important that you specify what you are. Are you an art director? Are you a motion designer? Are you a rigger? Because she said like, I'm looking for those things. And then I kind of separate things into like, this is VFX, this is this. So I think a lot of times it's like getting that essential information. It's like, what are you doing? What are you looking for in your website, and put like a reel you have. I think those are like the basic stuff you have to have. And then kind of like talk a bit about yourself, but not too long. Because then people can go onto your website and read more about it or something like that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think people sometimes try and make it a bit too complicated. And also, I like that you said about adding something in there about that you like the company's work or you saw like a recent project that they did that was cool and stuff like that. I think that's good because it shows that you're not just like copy and pasting, and you have actually gone through and selected some companies that you think will be a good fit for you. So I think that's a great advice. I wanted to talk to you a bit about working remotely and stuff as an art director, because is it right that you're working remotely now?
Yes. So this is kind of the first year that I'm doing remotely. 2 years ago, I was freelance as well, but I was mainly in London. Like I would do some remote work, but because I was in London, it was easier to just as well go to studios and work from there. For me, it works really good remotely. It's harder with art direction, obviously, because you want to be in the moment and in the team and having all those meetings. But because nowadays as well, there's more remote people, not just art directors. So a lot of times, either way, you have to have these kind of group Skype calls or stuff like that. I feel for me, the hardest thing is like time zones. like managing that and making sure that I don't overwork because someone is just starting to work and I'm finishing, but then I just continue. And sometimes it happens, like sometimes you're so absorbed in work. I've done like a project where I would start at 9 here, but then they were in the US side and I'll just continue like to midnight because that's when they were like waking up, and then we would have meetings and then I would have to give feedback and for other freelancers they were on the other side. So that was a bit stressful because we had people in Europe and people in like in the US side for the same project. So I would have to like talk with the people in Europe at the European time and then the other one. So was like hard to manage, but that was more like at the end of the project. But usually when I freelance remotely, I always try to do my time zone. To not go crazy. So I just do my normal hours. And if I'm just designing like style frames, it actually works really well for me if I'm working with US, for example, because I have a call with them before the project starts, so the day before. And then I know what I'm supposed to do. So from 9 to 6, I do my stuff. And usually by the time I'm finishing, they are arriving to the studio. So I just send them my stuff. We have a little chat. And then it gives them the whole day to figure out as well what feedback they wanted to give me, what I'm supposed to do, if the client replied to anything. So they already give me like instant feedback when we have a call. But then when I woke up, probably there's already an email saying, hey, we talked with the client and here's more stuff. So it actually, for me, works quite well because I can just concentrate on doing style frames. There's like, no much noise. I just do my stuff and then it works. Usually if you work more with the same time zone, there's much more that kind of thing, like how's things going, like there's much, even if you're remote, there's a lot of like slacking, like, oh, how's things going? So there's a lot more like back and forth, which is also great. So it depends on the projects. Like for me, sometimes I like to just have no noise and just do my stuff. So for me, it's great working with US in that sense because I just do my things and then they see it, we talk about it, and then they have the whole day to like digest it and then come back to me with more things to do.
In terms of that, so you've got like some clients in the US and in Europe and stuff, like how did you build up that base? And like, did you ever have any pushback from like working remotely?
Sometimes people want you in-house, mainly for like NDA and like if they work in something really big. Nowadays, like I feel more like in the commercial world, it's not as strict in that sense. I've got like some people saying like, hey, can you come and work here? But those are rare cases. But other than that, it's like works pretty good. Like I started out like it was really funny because like I didn't do anything different. But when I was in London, I got a lot of freelance from London, so I'll just go in-house. And once I moved back to Portugal, I started getting more from US, but nothing changed. Like I did one project for a US studio and then it slowly started ramping up and getting more. But it was very funny because as soon as I left UK and came back to Portugal, that's when I started doing much more for US. But I didn't change anything. So I think it was just timing. It just kind of felt like I did something, but I just didn't. It was just like a few years back, I was working with Blur a few times remotely. And that started because a friend of mine used to freelance for them and he recommended me. They needed like some help and he couldn't do it. So he recommended me. And that's kind of how I got my foot into like working with Blur, for example. So I think a lot of that goes within that, like where other people recommend you. And I guess because some of my friends are in US, maybe they recommended me there. And then that's how I start getting it, I think. But I don't really know how it changed from doing just in Europe to becoming like doing stuff for US. I have no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, it's probably like that thing of growing your network. It seems like to me, like recently you've been doing a lot of stuff though. Like you spoke at Off in Barcelona and you're going to speak at Node Fest in Australia. Do you feel like some of the speaking and that side of things has kind of raised your profile a bit in the industry too?
I don't know, actually, to be honest. I guess so. I think it's like at Off, I went there because last year I got this kind of partnership, like ambassadorship with HP, where they're like looking for 5, 6 different artists to like do pieces for them and kind of use their machines. So at Off, they were kind of the ones kind of sponsoring that. Like me and Rick went there to talk. I feel as well, the reason I think I've been doing a lot of talks is obviously I believe people like my work, but I also think it's because I'm a woman in the industry doing 3D, which is a bit rare, or
Right,
it's
yeah.
not rare. Like, is there still a few? But I feel like it's more and more. There's always obviously the talk about diversity. So I think it's like every conference is always trying to find like a balance. And then when they try to find for women in 3D, probably my name pops up. And like I said, I'm not saying that I don't have great work, but I feel like part of it, me being invited or actually getting into one of those, is because they want that diversity, right? And then they're like, oh, I'm an art director and I work in 3D. and I'm a woman. Okay, cool. That's great. Tick all the boxes. But yeah, I think it's like, I definitely got more followers based on like people sharing that I'm going to certain festivals and stuff like that. But I feel like, at least for me, I already had like a good foot on the industry, like working with different studios and doing style frames. So I think it's more, maybe new studios that I even wasn't aware of and stuff like that may contact me based on that.
Do you think it's because of like when you worked in London and stuff, you worked for like quite big studios and big names that kind of helped you to know those people, and then like those people move around and then they recommend you to other people, and that kind of helped you build up to working more remotely in Portugal?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Like I remember when I started going freelance the first time, I wrote it on Twitter, like, oh, I'm going freelance. And then I got a lot of retweets. And I think that like helped a lot. And remember when I worked with We Are 17, for example, was because one of their directors, he used to work at Feature Lux at the time I was there. So he saw that I was going freelance. So he told his boss, hey, Nidia is going freelance, like we should put her on the list. So I think it's definitely networking really helped me. Like even when throughout the years, every time I met freelancers at work or work with people, like I always kept in touch with a lot of them. Like I still do that as well. Like if I get an email for a project and I'm busy, I always say, oh, here's people that kind of fit that style as well. And maybe like they're free. So I always as well send friends of mine and stuff like that saying, hey, here's a list and maybe you find some people. And I think that's how it should be done. Like I'm not afraid of anyone stealing my, like, oh, I'm not going to give names because then they're going to start going for them instead of me. I feel like the motion design industry is so close together. You know, you doing the podcast and, you know, people sharing their knowledge. So I feel like that's the way that we kind of get into these studios, is like by just sharing, saying, hey, I know these great people and they may be free, you know, and then just share their websites or stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I've done that a lot before. It's kind of that thing of, we've been talking about it quite a bit. It's like coming from a mindset of like abundance, like where you're like, oh, I have enough. I don't need some more work, so I'll pass it on to someone else, rather than like having a mindset of desperation or like, oh my God, I have to take on like every single project and like work myself into the ground because like I'm scared about where the next project is coming from. And it seems like everybody who is successful and stuff, like they definitely like have this mindset of like, I want to help the community, I like want to recommend other people in the industry and be like involved. I feel like that really helps.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like, because for me, it was a lot of the times, like we're talking before, where I went to We Are 17 or stuff like that, was because people recommend me, or Blur as well. I'll probably wouldn't be able to work with Blur if it wasn't recommended. And even, for example, when I worked with Blur at the time, like the first project I did was quite small because they said, hey, it's the first time we're working with you and you're remote. Like we just kind of want to test the waters. And then that worked well. And then I kept on getting recurring work from them during that year and so on. But yeah, for me, it's like we're all in the same industry. We're all friends. And there's no point of like trying to be like, oh, I want everything for me. Projects always come in. And I feel it's more about you doing great work. If you work on something good, you're going to get much more work coming back from it. Like when I was last year at Tangel and we did the Microsoft project, like I feel that kind of as well pushed me back again up into people looking at me and sending me stuff for work. And because, you know, they seen that I art directed that project. So just because I did that project meant that I got so much more opportunities after that as well. So I feel it's more about doing good work than doing a lot of it.
I think that's true. But I feel like there's like a struggle sometimes that people have, is like kind of getting those good projects. I don't know, like what you think about that. If you have any advice around like trying to, you know, work with people who have the good projects and how to kind of get into that space.
It's kind of two ways to go around it. Like in my case, I work a lot of years full time,
right? Yeah.
In good companies, so that helped me build portfolio with like big projects and stuff like that because I was full time. So I think in my case that helped a lot because I think I was full time for like 6-7 years in different studios, kind of going around. So I think that helped, especially like coming from Future Deluxe when we were starting to do like Adidas stuff and Nike and all of that stuff. So that definitely helped. And then I feel like for me as well is a lot, especially nowadays, is a lot with personal projects. You know, like how social media is. Like you can find, maybe you never heard of someone and all of a sudden that person just released like an amazing video and then studios going to notice it. They're going to like, who's that guy? Like love that thing or that style. And I think a lot of times, like, for example, one example, like last year when I was working on the Microsoft project, we're looking for freelancers to help us on the design phase. And I've met this guy from Spain, like I've seen his work. We talked a bit. He was just a perfect match for the Microsoft project. I never worked with him, but I followed his work because I really liked what he was doing. So, you know, we emailed him and he was free. So for us, it was like the first time we worked with him. And then after that, like whenever we had something more that design look, he was already on our list. So I think it's just getting that first foot on the door. And then once things work fine, you're going to get into. And I feel like it's the same with Blur when I said that the first project I did for them was quite small.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes like you don't have to go straight for the big project, but you kind of get, like your contact and your foot on the door with a smaller project, and then they'll come back to you with a bigger project once they like know that they can trust you and stuff like that. For me, like personal projects or stuff like that work very well as well, because as an art director, when I'm looking for freelancers, I usually look a lot into personal projects.
Yeah.
Because it kind of shows me more your style, right? Once you're part of a team and it's for a client, obviously the style is much more overall equal to everyone. But once it's your personal project, I can really see what you're good at or what you really like doing. And that's usually what I usually look at people's websites.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So like what kind of places are you looking for designers and stuff like that? Is there particular like platforms that you go to, or?
Instagram nowadays is like, it's just easy to like browse and like follow new people. I'm always as well on Behance as well, like always looking there. For me, usually I'm like Behance, Instagram, and Twitter. Twitter is more for like conversations, but there's always people like sharing other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
Behance, I just scroll a lot and it's like, oh, this is nice, and then start following people from there. And then Instagram is so easy nowadays to just like follow people and then just start getting new projects and stuff, like personal projects and stuff like that is great to see from there as well.
Yeah, I think Instagram definitely seems like the one that most people are looking at nowadays, and most designers are getting noticed and stuff like that, because you can create the feed. And then we've been talking a lot about doing like smaller projects. Like you don't have to do like a massive personal project, because if it's just going on Instagram as well, it can be like a short little thing, and you could do like a lot of short little things. And I feel like that could be maybe more manageable, because what I've kind of come up against with people is like they feel like they don't have a lot of time. So I don't know whether you have felt like that in the past, like when you work in full time, like how did you fit your personal projects around that?
When I was full time, I think it felt like that's when I was actually doing more personal projects, just because I would do something at work and then I would go home and I would like, and I always had this thing of doing something completely opposite of what I was doing at work, just to kind of like, because as a freelance, I'm in the good position where I kind of choose a bit the projects, right? If there's two coming at the same time, I can be like, oh, I prefer doing that one because of that style, or people come to me for a particular style, right? They already kind of know me, what I do. But as a full time, you get projects and either you're doing the company style or they come with a very particular style. So I felt that at the time, that's where I felt more like I need to find my own stuff, and I would go home and try to do like a lot of works. But at that time as well, when I was starting, I was very crazy in terms of like, it's always like at home on the computer and barely like going out, because I had this thing that like, oh, I need to get better and I need to find my style. And there was a point that I remember I always kind of wrote my ideas down whenever I had ideas, like to do personal projects. And I remember one time being home and my flatmate was like, what's happening? I was like, I don't know. I have nothing to do. And it's really rare and strange. And she's like, no, watch a movie. I was like, no, usually I do some project or something. So she's like, no, rest. And I think that was my turning point to like, I need to kind of start balancing more and not to like a lot of just personal projects just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
But I felt it was easier to do then more personal projects. Nowadays, I feel like I'm always like, oh, I'll probably do some personal projects in between, like a project, like a freelance project in another. But I end up always getting either another project or just actually resting. And it's like, oh, actually, time to take some holidays maybe before something crazy goes in. So I think I went from working crazy hours and doing a lot of personal projects to now trying to balance more like quality of life and like actually taking a break. Like I think over the years I understood how important that is to kind of maintain yourself sane and actually feel more creative. Like every time I travel, I always come back like super like excited and with a lot of ideas. Or if I go to a festival, you always come like so pumped. So I feel like that's where I strive most with my personal projects, is when I'm like stop for a while and then I'm like full on like, okay, now let's do this, rather than like trying to do something just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, I think that as well, that what I've seen sometimes is when people go freelance and they feel like they can't take a holiday ever, and they can't like take a break because they're like, oh, but what if I go on holiday and then this like massive project comes in from my like favorite studio, and it's like, well, you can't really think like that forever, because you need to take a break and relax. And like you say, I feel like it gives you more energy for sure.
Yeah, I'm always trying like me and my husband was always like thinking like, oh, we should think in advance where we want to take our holidays, because otherwise you never take holidays because you get a project and then that project takes a month and then another one comes in and you just keep on accepting because that's what you're saying. Like you're always afraid that you're not going to have the next project, right? So we decided like we should like define where exactly we want to take our holidays and then say, okay, we're not accepting anything here. And I mean, and sometimes I still have times as well where I don't get projects right away, right? I'm like a week or something and you're like, oh, where am I going to get stuff? But then it's always, the typical where you don't get anything. And then the week after you get like free emails, it's like, you always get them all at the same time. And you're always like, why? So, I think it's also like important to say that it happens to everyone. It's not like everyone always gets projects, and sometimes I actually don't mind having those breaks in between and not getting stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's when I can actually rest. I was like, okay, now I should actually rest a bit and then go full on. But I think it's always like, even studios, sometimes they're quiet themselves. So it's not like you yourself as a freelancer are quiet. It may be that the studios themselves are actually quiet because they don't have many projects going on. But yeah, freelance life is a bit tough in that sense. But once you do it for a while, you understand it's like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And then I feel like you don't have that, like, when you're like not busy for a week or something, you're not like, oh my God, the world is ending. You realize that the work will come. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So I saw that you had a Society 6 shop. So do you like make some income on the side from selling your designs on there?
To be honest, I just recently started there, but it was that idea, like just having this kind of like passive income, right? Like trying to have something on the side.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very good at like pushing those things forward. I just put stuff in there and then I just hope people find it. I need to get better at that. But yeah, I think like it's something that me and my husband also talk about, having like this kind of passive income, like where you have these personal projects and maybe get something out of it. And last year, I kind of felt a bit at how that could work because I got one of my like old personal projects licensed to be the splash screen for InDesign.
Oh, cool.
So that was like, I just got an email like, hey, we really like this and we want to use it at InDesign. I was like, okay, sure. So that was like a good feeling, like knowing like, oh, I've done like a personal project like a few years back and now it's giving me money. So I think it's always like, how can you use that to kind of like your personal time and your personal style frames or projects to kind of get income. So I think I'm slowly trying to figure that out. But I find that nowadays is so saturated as well, the market. Like there's everyone doing it, that I think is like, it's hard sometimes to start getting it. But then once you start, I think you'll be fine. But I'm still in the very bottom of it. Like, yeah, just upload some stuff inside this and see how it works. That's pretty much the phase that I'm at the moment.
Yeah. So why did you choose Society 6, like, rather than like doing your own store or something like that?
I had like a few years back when I was in London, I had my own thing. Like I would just print them and send them and stuff like that.
Right.
But it was so hard because it's like, oh, I need to have the tubes to send. And then it's cheaper if I buy a lot of them, but then I need to store them somewhere and hope that people would actually buy the products from me. Or I need to print them. Should I print a lot? But then there's an investment right from the beginning. Will that investment come back with people buying it? So at the time when I was doing it, I found like this really good place that was not in London. I think it was outside London to print it. And it was really good prices. So I was kind of saying, okay, I'll just always have one poster at home. But then if I start getting more demand, I can print more. My prices were based on that company. But it just became like a lot of like so much to do, like to have that kind of your own shop.
Yeah.
And I had people talking about Society 6 and that they're using it. And you don't have to think about printing and if the quality is good and how to send it and tracking and all the stuff. So I just felt like for now I want to start with just someone kind of taking care of it and I just get a percentage out of it. If I start getting some traction out of it, I may then swap to kind of do my own thing. I think for the beginning, I'll just let someone else take care of that and I'll just relax, do my personal stuff and then see if I get some income from that.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few companies that do that for like t-shirts and stuff like that as well. And I think that's a really good idea because I've definitely like done this kind of thing in the past for like my band and stuff. Like you print all the t-shirts and you just got like boxes of t-shirts in your house and then you have to go to the post office and like post the t-shirts and a bit of a like long process for like not much return where it'd probably be better and more lucrative, like just based on the time that you're wasting to like do some sort of I think it's called like drop shipping, or that might just be for Amazon, but where someone else basically facilitates the making and sending of the product, which I think is good.
Yeah, I know there was one that I looked at when I was in London. At the time I didn't use because they're in US, but they would do like, they'll print it for you, the posters. But then when they send it, they would actually brand it like to your logo. So they would actually, instead of being like, oh, you got something from Society 6, you'll still just be on your website. But whenever people say, oh, I want 2 posters or stuff like that, you just go to their system and they'll print it, and then they'll just like put a sticker with your logo on the tube or the packaging. So you felt like it would come from you. But at the time it was really expensive because they only had, I think now they've grown into Europe, but they only had in US. So if anyone in Europe would try to buy it, it would be so much cost just in shipping. So I was like, nah, too much on shipping. I don't want to I don't think anyone would buy this just for one poster. But that was a cool idea because it will still feel part of you, like not just a bigger company. That is like Society 6 or stuff like that. You will feel like you actually done the work. Yeah, I think that there's so many options nowadays, even for posters, that is like, you're like one person in a million that is using that service. So yeah, for me at the moment, like I said, I haven't done any, I put on my website that I have Society 6, but that's it. That's as much as I've done.
Yeah, so I think I think I looked into using one of the things that they kind of do drop shipping, and they brand it to your brand and stuff like that. So when I find those links, I'll put them all in the show notes as well for people, because I can't remember right now off the top of my head. But yeah, I think it's a good thing to consider, and I think that a lot of people kind of forget about that, especially if you're doing art direction and design of your own projects and stuff, and you think that people would be interested in buying some things.
Yeah, I think because sometimes I get people asking like, oh, for me, sometimes it's hard because I get people like, oh, I really like this. But I was like, yeah, but then I did a style frame for a studio. Like, I'm not going to do that as a poster. And I think sometimes for me, that's the thing. Like, a lot of times I always feel like, oh man, I done this style frame for this studio. Probably they're never going to use it, but now it's kind of part of their thing. I cannot like print this and sell it as posters or stuff like that. So it's always like, always hard to manage. Like, you always, like, I always feel like I do the cool stuff when I'm working for someone. And every time I'm supposed to do a personal project, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? What should I do? It's like, I don't know. It's always funny to have that kind of, like, I'm always trying to explore things and try finding new stuff, or I have an idea and I try to do posters for it. And I always try to do posters, like, because I'm always thinking maybe I want to print it for myself instead of doing like 16 by 9 kind of style frame. I try to do more like a poster size and vertical or stuff like that, just in mind that I may want it for myself. But yeah, so usually all my personal projects end up going into like print rather than like style frame or like animation.
Yeah, that makes sense, because then at least you like have that option for yourself. I just wanted to ask you about, so you were saying like about, obviously you can't use like stuff that you do for companies. Is that because you're kind of signing a contract with them that says like they own the intellectual property and stuff of whatever the work that you create? Like, how is that working for you?
Yeah, sometimes in some contracts you have that, some don't have. But I always feel like because I done some style frames as part of a job, I always feel like it's kind of like me thinking that if I was full time at a studio, I would be working at their machines, right? Even as a freelance, if I was in London, I would go in house. I would work with their own computers and do things there. So I always feel like I can show it as my style frames, but I would never feel it doesn't feel right to like then kind of use that to my own like personal gain in that sense, because I was being paid my day rate to do style frames for a specific job. So I always like to keep it as, okay, that's that job. And, I got the style and all the stuff. And sometimes I may find some kind of cool technique and then I may reuse it later on a personal project, but I never like to, it doesn't feel right for me to just use something that I did, even if that style frame wasn't used at the end. It was still part of a job, so I don't feel right using it for my own thing.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like, it all depends on like a lot on contracts and what they say, and that a lot on the client, and a lot on like your relationship with the client, and like how you want to deal with that kind of stuff personally. It can get a bit tricky, I think, with like who owns what, and sometimes it is just easier, like you say, to be like, no, this is my personal work, this is like stuff that I've done for them, so I'm just going to keep that separate. Like it makes it much clearer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like once I'm sometimes exploring style frames or concepts, I may find something that may actually not work for the project. But sometimes I save that for some 3D file. And it's like, oh, I'm putting on the side because I feel this can become something better in a personal project. So sometimes that happens where I'm just exploring different things and then I'm like, this is not going to work for this project, but it's actually, I just found something cool. So I'll just save this out. And whenever I have time, I'll just come back to this, 4D file and just do something out of it. So sometimes that happens.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I like that where you're like, oh yeah, I just like did that little thing and that's totally wrong, but I'm just going to keep it for myself. I feel like that's good. So because you work in like 3D and Cinema 4D and stuff, do you have any resources and stuff that you recommend if someone does more 2D or they want to get into 3D? Do you have any places that you usually go to learn?
When I was starting to learn 3D, it was mainly like Grayscale Gorilla at the time that existed. I feel like nowadays there's so much like School of Motion, MoGraph Mentor, and plenty of new ones. So I think it feels like now it's easier to learn 3D, like at least get the basics out of it, like instead of just going through different random YouTube videos and Grayscale Gorilla small tutorials to find stuff out. I do feel 3D can help a lot in 2D as well. Like I keep on saying that. And the other day I saw something from Animate that they're doing like a character that was looking 2D, but they did in 3D and talking about how 3D is powerful in that sense, like that you can still use in 2D. Because I was a mentor at MoGraph Mentor for like 2 years, like 2-3 semesters. And a lot of people do 2D. I was always telling like, I don't want you guys to convert to 3D just because I do 3D. You should continue doing what you want to do. But I would always try to show them like stuff that they could do in 3D that would help them in 2D. And even just for drawing, like I remember at some point, one of the students, she was trying to do this kind of like kitchen scene or stuff like that. And I told her like, you can just use 3D for the perspective, like to help you draw. And then she was using that. So you should only do 3D if you really want to do it. I don't think people should feel like forced or like, oh, should I go into 3D because there's a thing or people are talking about it. Like I went to 3D because I just enjoyed it. I was doing 2D stuff and then starting 3D. And then I really start liking 3D. So that's why I went for it. A lot of times people are like, oh, the trend now is like cell animation. I should learn this and I feel you should just learn what you really think you're going to like and start finding what you like rather than just going by trends.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like there's any ways that people could try and develop their own style and stuff like that?
I feel it's just exploring. Like when I started out, for me, a lot of things that would happen was, for example, when I was at FutureLux, we did a lot of like dark stuff and particles and stuff like that once in a while. So people start thinking that was my style. So I was like, no, I do other stuff as well.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like the personal project was just kind of like exploring. And a lot of times when I do personal projects, I don't do them with the idea that I'm going to share them. I do them for my own sake. I do them for like get better at some tool, learn something new, or some style that I wanted to explore and see if I really like it. And I think that's kind of like how I got to what I do nowadays and the style that I do, just because there was a lot of trial and error, a lot of like experimentation, and then really figuring out like, oh, I really enjoy doing this, and then kind of started that way. Like I remember at some point people were like, oh, I really like your style, and at some point it's like I didn't even know I had a style.
Yeah,
because you're just so much absorbed into doing your own stuff that you don't understand. And then people are like, no, you have a style, and then you start looking at your projects like, yeah, I can see that now. I feel like as an illustrator, you probably get it faster because you start drawing more into a specific style. I feel like once you do like 3D or something like that, in my case, I just explored a bunch of different things. And then I realized, okay, I'm not good at that. I didn't enjoy that. So skip that one and then start, okay, I'll try X particles. Ooh, I like X particles. And, like I like the lighting and shading. Let me do more stuff like that. So I think for me, it was just, and it's still a process. Like every time I'm always so curious about different things. I was like, ooh, I'll try this thing now. And then I may like it and kind of maybe do something about that or something like that. So I think it's just finding that style or finding that thing. It comes with time. For me, it just came through trial and error and doing a lot of stuff. And then people from the outside saying, I like your style. I was like, okay, I have a style now. Didn't know. So I think sometimes it comes from that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. It's not like trying to force it or anything like that. If there's one piece of advice that you would like the audience to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
I would say to stay humble, do personal projects and, like be you, especially if you're like freelancing or, you want to stand out. You should stand out because of something that you're doing, not just because there's a trend. So I felt like that always kind of been my motto, like just, I'm always trying to learn new stuff. I'm always curious about new software and all this stuff, but I do it for my own gain, not because I want more followers or stuff like that. I just do it for myself and then just worked out because I just got better and then people start recognizing for what I did. And then, yeah, I think staying humble for me is like, you always want to work with people that are super nice and, like down to earth. So I think that's really important as well, because it's not about just how good you are at doing something, it's how good you are in a team as well and how you can work with other people. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's great advice. So do you want to tell the audience where they can find you and your work?
They can find me on Instagram. It's I'm Nydia, or my website, nydias.com, is pretty much like the best. And then from there, there's plenty other links that they can go and find my stuff.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put it all in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
And thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you again to Nidia for coming on the show. You can find all the show notes at motionhatch.com/48. I really appreciate you listening to the end. If you enjoyed this episode, please do consider sharing it with a friend on social media. That helps us get the podcast out there. And please subscribe and leave us a rating review. We really want more motion designers to hear this so we can help them in their businesses too. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. See ya.